How to Find Out If Your Local Crime Lord Has a Boyfriend. A guide by Stephanie Brown, by When Icarus Flies. A Batman All Media Types fanfic, with additional tags for identity porn, identity reveal, crack treated seriously, Stephanie Brown is spoiler, Stephanie Brown centric, Jason Todd centric, Jason Todd is Red Hood, POV Stephanie Brown, POV Jason Todd. I guess it's M/M, fake/pretend relationship. I would just like to be clear, a character is pretending to date themselves. Do not read for the romance, you will be sorely disappointed. Stalking. Barely, though. Think Tim Drake style. The third part in Siblings, I guess. Summary. In Jason's defense, Stephanie Brown, aka Spoiler, she was made for this, being a vigilante. Oh, come on! I don't even know your name. On second thought, maybe Jason had made a horrible mistake. In Jason's defense, Stephanie Brown, aka Spoiler, she was made for this, being a vigilante. Oh, come on. I don't even know your name. On second thought, maybe Jason had made a horrible mistake. My name is Red Hood. She glared at him. That's not what I mean, and you know it. After deciding that wouldn't work, she said, You know my identity. That's different. Jason was teaching Steph how to use a gun. She wasn't half bad at it. And they had taken a break, which had somehow derailed into making coffee and chatting. Jason liked coffee. He wasn't such a big fan of chatting. How was that different? Well, if I remember correctly, it was seeing your face, or letting you die. Stephanie apparently did not appreciate that much, as she glared at him and retorted, When you almost died, I didn't look at your face. And I'm grateful, Jason replied dryly. He really was grateful about that. He wouldn't have blamed her if she did. But with the scarf and his spare helmets, she didn't get the chance. Or, more accurately, she didn't take the chance. Ugh. Spoiler flopped back on her chair. You know this coffee sucks, right? You have tons of money. Why do you buy the cheapest stuff they have? I'm not buying $20 coffee. Jason barely drank the stuff anyway. He bought it at Spoiler's behest. Let's get back to work. Stephanie sighed but got up, downing the dregs of her coffee. She was wearing her Spoiler uniform, but with the mask pulled up over her mouth so she could drink. They were in one of Jason's warehouses. Both of them were in costume, in case one of Jason's men walked in. 2 hours later, Spoiler could hit a bullseye on a target 10 meters away. Jason would love to claim ownership over her success, but she was a natural at this. Not that it mattered. She was fairly set on not using guns when in costume, but had agreed to learn how to use them in case of emergencies. I'll see you next week, Spoiler called out cheerily, before disappearing out the window. Don't be late, Jason called back, even though he was sure she was either out of earshot or ignoring him. Stephanie had pretty much stopped following Hood at this point. There wasn't much more she needed to know about him. She knew about a couple of his bases. She knew there were more, but she figured she would find out about them eventually and decided not to push her luck. His operations, and she was almost friends with some of the people working for him. She was certain Red Hood wasn't going to hurt her. And now when she asked questions, he answered. Mostly sarcastically, and often very unhelpfully, but still. He seemed to have relaxed since they agreed to work together. Or since they had made, as he called it, the agreement. Whatever. But Steph still had one question he refused to answer. What was his name? Who was he? She understood that there was privacy and all that, but she was curious. Besides, it was fair. He knew her identity. She had thought that she could convince him to tell her, but that conversation had been shut down very quickly. So she was back to this, sneaking around and trying to figure it out herself. Which was why she was currently in the elevator to Hood's safe house. Would this ordeal be easier if she read the book she had stolen from him? Probably. But, well, she had been busy, and if Steph was being honest, she wanted to do this herself, without any help. Proof she was capable. She walked down the corridor, trying to remember which apartment number it was. Steph was pretty sure it was 33B. Just as she was about to punch in the code Hood had told her, part of the agreement, the door opened. Steph was greeted with a man who was about a head taller than her. If she had to hazard a guess, much stronger. Guess that was the wrong apartment. Hi, Steph greeted him brightly. Hello. He paused, at a loss for words. But it can't be every day that a blonde teenage girl tries to, for a lack of a better word, break into your apartment. She laughed. Sorry, I must have the wrong apartment. You new to the building? No, I'm visiting someone, she replied, keeping her tone cheery. The man had a streak of white through his hair and green eyes. Like, green. Right, well, don't let me disturb you, he said, moving past her. Wait, she called after him suddenly. The way Steph saw it, this guy could help her. He could tell her when Red Hood came in, if anyone else came out of his apartment, and so on. What? Do you live here? Please say yes, she silently begged. No, sorry, I was just, visiting someone. A friend of yours? A friend worked too. Steph just had to get the guy to introduce them. Something like that. The guy muttered. Can I meet them? Why? Steph was suddenly aware of how pushy she was being. It was fine, she was almost there. She just had to continue this conversation for a while longer. I just wanted to meet people around here, 'cause I'll probably be staying here quite a bit. Steph hoped that that wasn't true. If she was staying at Red Hood's safe house, then she was probably injured. And she had had quite enough of that. Right, well, you can't, he's not home. He sounded sour when he said that, and before Steph could ask another question that might get a restraining order filed against her, the man said, bye, and disappeared into the elevator. She chewed on her lip. She had no idea which apartment was the safe house. For a lack of a better option, she messaged Hood, Which apartment is your safe house? It took only a few seconds for the reply to come. 33B, and then Y. Steph has come up with an excuse beforehand in case she ran into Red Hood while she was here. I think I left something there. Okay. Steph's mind was reeling. Who had just come out of Hood's apartment? Why did he sound upset? Was that Hood? Jason knew Stephanie didn't leave anything in his safe house. He also knew that for them to trust each other, he had to not question everything she does. Still, he was surprised when she showed up out of the blue. Besides, it's not like he could give her a random apartment number. He was just walking out of the building. He had to do some shopping. He was getting the second cheapest coffee they had, just to spite Stephanie, when he got her text. He'd have to come up with a lie that sounded plausible so that he'd have an answer for the next time he saw her. That gave him a little over a week, if he was lucky. Steph had come to the conclusion that the man she had met was not Hood. First, she hadn't seen Hood without his helmet, and she didn't think he would walk out of one of his safe houses as a civilian. With how paranoid he was, it was a minor miracle that he took it off at all. Second, the man seemed annoyed that the friend he had been visiting hadn't been there. Hood was smart, and if that was him, then he could have said he was dropping something off, or something. Third, Hood would have just told her. If he ran into him outside his safe house, then there was no reason to lie. It wasn't like she was going to tell anyone. Plus, she was pretty sure the man she'd met was taller than Hood. So, no, the man was not Hood. But that didn't mean that he didn't know Hood. And from what she could tell, they weren't friends per se. You see, Steph knew quite a bit about failed relationships, having had quite a few herself. In fact, she would consider herself something of an expert on them. And he had the look of someone who was regretting doing something nice for someone else. Steph had worn that look herself quite a lot. It's not her fault that all the boys, and some of the girls, she knew didn't get her, or that she didn't get them. Whatever, it's over now. But Steph was still at a standstill. She hadn't talked to Hood since then, and she wanted to figure out this whole mess before she saw him again, which left her with one option: the book. That evening, once her mother was asleep, she rummaged around in her top drawer and drew out the book she had stolen from his safe house. There was a lot of stuff about becoming a crime lord, starting a gang, building his reputation, a disturbing plan about beheading rivals, blah blah, nothing very useful right now. Someone named Talia. The name was mentioned in passing. Somebody whose help was Plan F, and who had a stupid secret that could be used as blackmail. Steph would have to see if she could find out more about her later. And some stuff about a British guy who was only referred to as Alf. She had no idea what Britain had to do with anything. But the guy from the safe house didn't have a British accent either, so she moved on. And that was it. She flipped through the rest of the book, but all she was greeted with was blank pages. She had spent 2 hours practically decoding that fancy fuck-ass handwriting for nothing. She knew next to nothing about Red Hood. She threw the book across the room in frustration. It fell open on the first page, and Steph's eyes landed on something she hadn't noticed before. A small scratched-out patch in the back of the cover. She rolled off her bed and picked up the book. The word had been scribbled over so many times she could hardly see what was underneath, but she hoped the indentations from the pen hadn't been completely destroyed. Holding it up to the lamp she had on her desk, she could see there were 2 words. Maybe it was a name. She could make out a J and an S in the first word, and the second word began with either an I or a T. She squinted and moved the paper closer to her face. Maybe the last word might be Tomb? Todd. It was definitely Todd. That was it. The first word definitely began with J. And there might be an N at the end? She had no idea. Well, it was better than nothing. She picked up her phone and typed J. Todd into the search bar. The first thing that popped up was a photo of a kid wearing a suit, looking very out of place in what she assumed was a gala or another rich person event. The text under the search bar read, "Did you mean Jason Todd?" Sure, she thought. Why the hell not? Jason Todd was a kid from Crime Alley who was adopted by Bruce Wayne when he was 12. A real rags to riches story, Stephanie thought dryly. He excelled academically and was short for his age. He was also, as she soon found out, dead. No one knows exactly how Jason Todd died, hence the number of true crime podcasts that explore his supposed murder, and the rabbit hole of Reddit forums Stephanie disappeared into for a couple of hours. In short, it unanimously decided that Jason Todd was super duper dead. So, bummer. But while she couldn't do anything about his death, she could solve her own case. The identity of the notorious crime lord, Red Hood. Why did Red Hood have a dead kid's notebook? Did this have anything to do with the safe house guy? Actually, now that she thought about it, Steph brought up a headshot of Jason Todd on her phone, and yep, dead ringer for safe house guy. Red Hood was maybe friends, possibly dating a billionaire's dead son. Jason was freaking out a little. He was meeting up with Spoiler in, he checked the time, a minute. He had no lie. He had no excuse, no reason that would justify a random guy being in his safe house. I'm here. Spoiler's cheerful greeting probably would have made him flinch if his time at the League hadn't trained that out of him. Hello. They were both wearing their suits again, and they were at the same warehouse as before. It was an easy meeting place, under Jason's control, but not in a place he used regularly. What are we doing today? Shooting again? She still sounded cheerful, like nothing was different. Jason was glad. He wasn't planning on bringing up their accidental meeting, and if she didn't bring it up, then they could both just move on, like it had never happened. Yes. He was planning on giving her moving targets this time, seeing if she could get the hang of shooting in situations closer to what she'll actually have to face on patrol. If she ever chose to use guns, that is. To his surprise and delight, everything continued as usual for the rest of their meeting, and while Spoiler still missed half her shots, shooting at moving things was a lot harder than sedentary targets. She was doing very well for a beginner. They packed everything up, moving the foam balls Jason had her shoot at while he threw them into the air, into the closet in the corner of the warehouse. He was just about to say goodbye when she spoke first. Thanks for giving me the apartment number the other day. Her tone was light, but Jason could hear the tension under the surface. Yeah, it's no problem. Right. There was a beat of silence, where Jason prayed the topic would change. But alas. By the way, I thought you should know there was someone else there. If this was her telling Jason she knew his identity, then she was phrasing it really weirdly. Oh? Yeah. She hesitated before going on. He seemed pretty upset, though. Jason was not upset when he bumped into Stephanie. He was caught off guard and trying his best to not feel the bullet wound in his arm, but he was not upset. And I don't know what it was about. Why would she think he was upset? Was it just his face? And I'm not saying 'cause that's your business. Jason remembered thinking Talia was mad at him when he first came to the League, but she said she wasn't, so maybe it was something like that. Trust me, I don't get involved in other people's love lives. I learned that lesson a long time ago. Then again, Talia was a notorious liar, and she was good at it, which made it harder to know when she was lying, so maybe she really was mad at Jason back then. But I just think you should fix things with your boyfriend, because he seems pretty mad. This again. Jason wasn't mad. It was just... he wasn't even that hard to read, and... What? Look. Spoiler shuffled back. I know it's none of my business, but I just think... Yeah, I got that part. He didn't, but that's not the point. What did you say he was? Your boyfriend? This was it. This was Jason's way out. This was his lie. His mind was quickly forming a plan. If he could just pretend to date himself for a few weeks and then slip into the conversation that he had broken up with, well, himself, then that was it. He found it out. I didn't mean to assume. Spoiler hurriedly corrected herself. No, he is my boyfriend. He reassured her. God, this plan already felt stupid. Okay, well, I didn't tell anyone, just so you know. Okay, thanks. How are things with your boyfriend? They were training again, knife throwing. Red Hood had the weirdest checklist of things he wanted to teach her. And Steph was, well, bored, curious, and desperate for drama. Red Hood missed the target, stumbling, and spun around to face her. What? He sounded tense. Yeah, it's good. Steph could tell he's lying. Anyone would be able to see that he was lying. Right, okay. You need to fix your posture, Hood said, changing the subject very unsubtly. Steph allowed it. So? Spoiler, I managed to track Jason down while he was on patrol. It was a fairly quiet night. Otherwise, he doubted she would be here. As much as she liked to make jokes, Spoiler didn't mess around when it came to protecting people. It was something Jason appreciated. He was currently standing on a rooftop overlooking the majority of Crime Alley. If something began to go down, then he would know about it. Anything new in your life? Nope. Spoiler hummed, clearly looking for a different answer. How's Jason? Jason threw her a sharp look. How had she figured out his name? Or his fake boyfriend who was actually just himself's name? Had he told her? Maybe. Honestly, there was so much going on that he might have just forgotten. He also hadn't slept in a while, which probably wasn't helping. He's fine. Cool. Good. What was the best way to end a fake relationship? What was the best reason for breaking up that wouldn't get Spoiler involved? The fake dating your secret identity plan was becoming harder than Jason thought it would be. Spoiler seemed determined to keep herself updated on the status of Jason's relationship, and Jason was starting to crack under the pressure. I mean, shootouts and severed heads are fine, but fake dating himself? Apparently, that's his breaking point. He was in the safe house Stephanie knew about, which, looking back, might have been a mistake. This became obvious when somebody started knocking. Hi! Stephanie, like always, greeted him brightly. Jason was not, for the record, wearing his helmet, or his armor. At this point, he was half hoping that Stephanie would figure out who he was, just so he could stop doing this. He had never dated a person in his life. He had never even wanted to date a person in his life. Hello, Jason said cautiously. This was only the second time he had spoken to Stephanie out of costume, and he had to make sure he didn't act too much like Hood. Can I help you? Yes. Or, well, I wanted to help you. Kind of. What? She laughed a little nervously. Look, I think we got off on the wrong foot. Can we talk? We are talking. Right, yes. So, I wasn't completely honest last time we met, because I know, your boyfriend. Jason was done with this. He couldn't do it. He couldn't have another conversation like this. I don't have a boyfriend. Stephanie's eyes widened. Thank God she figured it out. If there was one thing Jason had learned from these last few weeks, it was he was a terrible fake boyfriend and his identity was not worth it. You guys broke up? Are you fucking kidding me? Jason wasn't exactly sure how Stephanie ended up in his apartment. All he knew was that he wanted to go home and Stephanie was nice. Now they were drinking tea. Stephanie was currently looking around his apartment. At the overflowing bookshelves, the coffee table with some water ring stains on it, the kitchen that Jason was pretty fond of. He found that he didn't dislike it as much as he thought he would. "If you don't mind me asking, why did you two break up?" Jason scrambled for a reason. "We, had a disagreement about family stuff. You know, I get it's none of my business, but Hood isn't great with the whole emotion thing." "Yeah, well..." Jason had to shut this down. "I don't care. It's over. I'm done." "Okay." Steph nodded. "Good for you." Steph was pretty sure she had figured out what went wrong between Jason and Hood. It went like this. Jason died, for unknown reasons. Bruce Wayne didn't go to the funeral. Neither did his pseudo-brother, Richie Grayson. So now that Jason was back, also unknown why and how, he was understandably mad. So Jason wants revenge. Hood is an up-and-coming crime lord. They get close. Hood offers to help. What way better to hurt Bruce than taking down Gotham City's #1 protector, Batman? But that still didn't explain why he had beef with Robin. It felt like there was a missing piece of the puzzle she was missing. Just one piece, and everything would click into place. Steph was wide awake and had nothing better to do, so she started printing out pictures and making one of those maps you see in detective shows, with the yarn and everything. Steph didn't have a board, or yarn, but she had blue tack and an empty space on her wall. She had pictures of current Gotham vigilantes, Batman, Nightwing, Robin 3.0, and Black Bat. The past ones, Robin 1.0 and Robin 2.0 and Batgirl. The Wayne family, both previously deceased and alive. Bruce Wayne, Timothy Drake, Cassandra Cain, Richard Grayson, Jason Todd. She'd also printed out some articles surrounding Jason Todd's disappearance and subsequent death, and Red Hood's takeover of the criminal underground. Stephanie pursed her lips and looked at the wall. Robin 1.0 was clearly a younger Nightwing, who looked eerily similar to Richard Grayson. She put the photos next to each other, and yep, definitely the same person. And if he was a vigilante since he was a kid, Batman was Bruce Wayne. The puzzle pieces slid together. Jason Todd was Robin 2.0. He died doing some vigilante stuff. Steph sat on the floor leaning against the bed looking at her map. Everything made sense now. It was actually a little unnerving how easy it was. She was sure she was right. It all made sense. Jason Todd didn't talk to Bruce anymore. That's why he lives in Crime Alley. His apartment was nice, but not billionaire nice. Jason Todd must have had a whole change of heart around the whole revenge plan, and him and Hood argued about it, causing their breakup. Steph would never forgive someone if they threatened her mom. She understood why Jason was against getting back together with Hood. The only question left was what she was supposed to do now. She should probably stay out of it, but, well, she couldn't just stand by and do nothing. She had to talk Hood out of hurting Jason's family. "Sorry to hear about the breakup." Oh god, Jason did not want to have this conversation. Yep. They were on patrol. Jason was showing Stephanie some of his usual routes, and talk about some patrol stuff that turned into talk about Stephanie's life. She had to write an essay on Private Peace by Michael Morpurgo, which led Jason to rant about literary themes. She then talked about a Steven, who was a pretty crap person, but apparently hot, and Jason told her to dump him, which had then led to this. Honestly, Jason would be surprised if the whole Steven thing was something fake Stephanie had come up with just so they could talk about this. I don't want to talk about it. Okay, I get it. I just need to say something. Jason took a deep breath. Okay. I just think if Jason is uncomfortable with something, you should respect that. Jason spent some time trying to figure out what she meant before he realized she was expecting a response. I will do better. Dude, I don't think Jason wants to get back together with you. I know. I don't want to get back together with him either. Okay. Good for you two. Jason didn't see Stephanie again until a few weeks later. He was at a store to buy flour. He had a big operation in a few weeks, and he stress bakes a lot in the lead up to these things. She was in the coffee aisle, comparing 2 different boxes. Hello. Stephanie looked up, and when she saw Jason, she smiled. The idea that someone would be happy to see him was strange. Hi! She waved him over to her, and Jason walked down the aisle. What are you doing? He asked, looking at the boxes of coffee in her hand. Proving a point, Steph replied, putting one box on the shelf and the other in her basket. Okay. How about you? What are you getting? Jason lifted his basket to show her. Baking supplies. Oh, I love baking! Do you know what you're gonna make? They were wandering over to the tills. Probably just brownies, or cookies, or something. I haven't really decided. Jason would be the first to admit that he was not a great conversationalist. However, Stephanie didn't really seem to mind, and they continued their conversation until they were out of the store. Well, I hope your baking goes well. Thanks. You know, you can have some if you want. Jason offered. Whatever he baked, he always ended up making way too much. Really? Stephanie brightened. Sure. She dug around in her pocket before drawing out a scrap piece of paper. This, she said, writing on the piece of paper, is my number. She handed the paper to Jason, who was suddenly feeling glad that he had a separate phone for civilian stuff, even if he rarely used it. Okay. Let me know when you're baking stuff. Steph waved as she walked down the street, while Jason stood and waved back. He was pretty sure this was what having a friend was like. Stephanie wasn't exactly sure how she managed to befriend her crime lord partner's newly ex-boyfriend, but here she was, in his apartment, watching him make biscuits. I think you need a rebound. Jason turned around and squinted at her. How old are you? 16? Why? How old are you? 19. Steph frowned. How old is Hood? He's, early 20s. Okay, that's fine. That's, So, how long did you two go out for? About a month or 2. Okay, good. Anyway, like I was saying, you need a rebound. You're too young to know about that sort of stuff. Jason reprimanded, pointing a spoon at her. No, I'm not. If anything, you're too old to not know about that sort of stuff. I do know about it. I just don't participate. There's a first time for everything. He sighed. Why are you so desperate for me to get over this whole breakup thing? Steph shrugged. You seem sad. That's it. Does it need to be anything else? I guess not. Does that mean you'll do it? Jason hesitated. Fine. Great, so I know this guy that works at a coffee shop, and Jason could not believe he was doing this. At first he agreed to it because he thought it would be the normal thing to do. Then he began going through with it because he thought might be fun. After all, he had never tried dating before, and it might be nice. And so here he was, at a bar waiting for someone Steph described as blonde Timothy Chalamet. He hadn't even met the guy yet, and he already hated this. Jason didn't date, guys or girls. He was much happier alone. Hey! Someone interrupted his train of thought, and Jason turned to see someone who did, indeed, look like a blonde Timothy Chalamet. You're Jason? Yeah. Troy, right? That's me. Nice to meet you. Jason shook his hand, and they walked over to a booth. This was really fun. Yeah, it was. Jason was walking Troy home. He was nice, and Jason was taught what to do on a date at 2 a.m. after a patrol by Alfred when Bruce had gotten himself into another scandal the night before. He was a perfect gentleman. That being said, he hated this. The whole date was semi-awkward. Troy was a nice guy, but Jason wasn't interested in relationships, and there were some moments throughout the night where Jason forgot that he was on a date and felt like just another hangout with a friend. But sooner or later, reality would come crashing back down, and he would remember why he was there. Well, this is me. Right. Jason and Troy stood on the steps leading up to the apartment building for a moment. Look, Troy, I don't know if Steph told you, but I, just got out of a pretty serious relationship, and I'm really, and I'm not really, you know. Troy smiled at him. Yeah, she told me. Well, it was nice meeting you, even if nothing will come of it. He held out a hand for Jason to shake. Yeah, you too. Jason took the long way back to his house. It was peaceful at night. He thought about the date. It was nice. Troy was funny. He liked classic literature. Jason hated every moment of it. It was just something about dating. It irked him. He never wanted a relationship. He liked friends. He liked family. Jason realized with a sinking feeling that Steph was his friend. At some point, she could end up becoming family. And he was lying to her. She trusted him with her identity, and Jason had no reason not to trust her. She had risked her life and her identity to save him. Jason made a decision. He sent Steph a quick text. Date's over. Can you meet me at my apartment? I need to tell you something. He looked at the dots signaling Steph was typing. He needed this to go well. Hey, kid. A sleazy voice made Jason look up from his phone. Where are you going? Great. The one thing Jason needed. He would have to find a way to explain the gunshot wounds to, well, anyone who found the guy with his kneecaps blown out. Just as Jason was resigning himself to not going out in his civilian identity for a while, a purple blur jumped down from the neighboring rooftop. Soon enough, the guy was a groaning mess on the floor. Are you all right, sir? She was making her voice deeper. She sounded stupid. Jason looked at the guy on the ground. He looked back up at Steph. The alley was abandoned. No time better than the present. Hey, Stephanie. Who's Stephanie? Why, you must have me confused for someone else. Jason didn't know how to respond to that, so he just blew past it. There's something I've been meaning to tell you. We've never met before. I'm Red Hood. Spoiler was silent. Jason held his breath. Then he watched as Spoiler left the alley. Jason called Spoiler for a second time that day. He needed to make it up to her. There was a banging on his door. He left the phone on the counter and walked to open it, ready to tell whoever the salesperson was to fuck off. Okay, you know what? Steph started talking before he had opened the door. That was so shitty of you. I cannot believe that you would do that. I spent a month and a half believing your stupid lie, and that might be my fault, but you had no reason to lie for that long. Steph took a shaky breath. Right, that's it. If you have nothing to say, I'm leaving. Wait. This was Jason's chance to make things right. You're right. Steph looked surprised. I should have trusted you. I'm sorry. Okay. She shifted a bit. Thank you. But that doesn't make it better. What would make it better? Well, for starters, you could start buying drinkable coffee. I'll get to it. There was a moment of silence before they both started to laugh. I can't believe you pretended to date yourself just so you wouldn't have to tell me your identity. I'm not interested in your judgment, Stephanie. I am giving it to you anyway. You're welcome. Also, you can just call me Steph. You can call me Jason. Just Jason? Not Jace? Mr. Evil Crime Lord who is totally not a giant softie? Jace is fine. The other two are not. Aw, are you sure? Because... Author's note. I'm pushing my Aeroace Jason agenda. Guys, get on board. I agree with this. Troy might be making an appearance later on for plot reasons. Fun fact, I read Private Peace when I was 10, and it made me cry. It's an amazing book, and it changed who I was as a person. Anyway, I believe that Jason didn't really have a lot of friends growing up. What with the whole dead for a few years thing, I think he's pretty bad at the whole talking thing. I'm not going to be able to edit out all of the bell sounds throughout this entire thing. I don't know why he's so much right now. What is it about nearly 4:30 in the morning that really gets him going? And he had the look of someone who was regretting doing something nice for someone else. Stephanie, read the room. Stephanie, sweetheart. Okay. I don't remember that the first time I read this. That is tragic. Stephanie, baby, sweetheart, snookums. Me when I date a billionaire's dead son. Cat, I will fight you. What are you doing? Over there with your stupid little bell? Steph looked up. Hello? You want to talk about it? However, Stephanie? It's like, definitely, but Stephanie. Well, let's go, it's 4:20.